There is steel in this Bible. And though in America today we may be a soft people, we are a very mushy, soft people, the days are coming when you will want a theology with steel in it. And all the happy feelings won't be happy at all. When blood flows as high as a horse's bridle, you will think differently about justice.
For me, this beautiful, rich, and energetic country of ours can become a model of the just society in which every citizen will enjoy his fundamental rights, in which two great linguistic communities and peoples of many cultures will live in harmony. C'est ça, le Canada.
Justice, if you really want to simplify it, its basic elements are parties having the case decided on the true facts and the correct law as soon as possible with the least amount of expense.
I used to just picture this concept of justice like most people would picture it, two scales, and that would be either in God's kingdom or in our court system. That's how the concept of justice is portrayed.
I think the scales are, and the word blind isn't bad. Well, she has a blindfold. Is to show the purity of justice, that no irrelevant or harmful consideration will be taken into account in talking about decisional justice in the resolution of a dispute, but just pure law.
However, the more I've been thinking and reading about it, I think that there's an element of God's justice that is meant to be restorative and not just punitive. So in our court systems, there's obviously consequences for your actions and you're punished, or you have to pay retribution or those kind of things. Not that that's necessarily different in God's kingdom, but I wonder if our secular thinking misses that element of restoration. So if you look at Old Testament, there's something about when weak people come into a community, the stronger people are to watch for them. So if they're the oppressed or the widows, the orphans, they're to be brought back into a larger, stronger community and made strong as part of that community. And there's that element of restoration that I wonder if it's missing as we think about secular justice.
I think God's justice is essentially distributive justice, as I discussed it. It operates in a slightly, or more than slightly, different field. God is concerned with the suffering of every human being and is not blind to anyone and their concerns.
For a long while I corresponded with a boy who was in prison. In prison probably for about 14 years. He had been abused by his grandfather. He twice got his mother with a rope around her neck. He was highly intelligent, so they couldn't deal with him at school, so they put him into a kind of remand home, kind of juvenile prison. When he was, I think, 16, he was involved in armed robbery. He didn't kill anybody, he didn't shoot anybody, but he was involved, and he was sent to prison. And that would seem to be human justice. This boy has done wrong, he goes into prison. He was effectively removed from human society for somewhere in the region of 14 years. At no time until probably the last 3 months in which he was in prison did anybody recognise that this guy had an incredibly high IQ. He had the possibility of going to university once he was out. He had done some examinations, but his potential to love, his potential to act responsibly, his potential to learn had been demeaned and denied by a system which seemed to be to do with justice, but actually it was about incarceration. Now sadly, he has died in the past 2 years. But I believe that God's justice differentiates in that instance clearly from what was human punishment. God's justice would both have required him to pay the price for his misdemeanour, but God's justice would also have released in him and have found in him the goodness which the prison system denied. And probably God's justice would have, and now in heaven, pray God this does happen, will allow him to understand why he went off the rails. And in the merciful embrace of God, he'll be reconciled to all whom he ever offended and forgiven for what he's done wrong.
Secular justice is man-made, or human being made. It's in the form of written laws, in the form of judicial decisions that become part of the common law, and very importantly, it's administered by human beings. It's all secular in distinction to God's justice. Now that doesn't mean, and I'll give you examples, that it's different, that it's in the sense that it's concerned with subjects that aren't the concern of God's justice, etc. That might be true in some respects, but in many important respects they are concerned with the same thing.
There is the Church Council on Justice and Corrections, which we have a very small part in, takes an alternate view of secular justice in the correctional system, and it out of that sort of biblical vision of restorative justice, that the victim and offender reconciliation program emerged about 25 years ago. That not for all crimes, but for certain kinds of crimes, and where there's an agreement by the victim to come together with the offender. The circles of support, for example, is another initiative that for these would be sexual offenders. That once they're released into the community, they have a circle of people in the churches who support them, so that there's constant support, in a sense constant monitoring isn't the right word because that isn't their responsibility, but people who will walk with people who committed these crimes on their journey. Mm-hmm. and it's a very different approach to justice than simply incarcerating people and leaving them there, which the evidence suggests doesn't work.
Restorative justice, I think we're getting into dispute resolution. And one of the functions of dispute resolution, if there's been a wrong, the mechanism would lead to compensation that would restore the person wronged to their position before the wrong was committed.
Justice is extremely important within the tradition of the PCC. One excellent example is the Declaration of Faith Concerning Church and Nation, which was written in 1954 and adopted in 55. It was a statement focused on the right of the church to address the state on issues of justice, tyranny, but it also is introspective towards the church by inviting the church to always reform itself according to the Word of God. So justice has to be done within the faith community when it wants to call for justice to be done beyond it. But the prophetic right to speak for God in calling for the justice of God's reign in the world is established as a subordinate standard of faith, as a confession of the Presbyterian Church in Canada. So it's extremely important. And it shows up again in Living Faith, in a very succinct but clear statement on the importance of justice, which I can read for you. It says, God is always calling the church to seek that justice in the world which reflects the divine righteousness revealed in the Bible. So you can see the balance there between the word justice and righteousness, and this quote actually reflects the understanding that the Greek concept dikaiosune includes both rightness with God and the gift of rightness with God, and justice, the doing of justice in society and culture. And then it goes on to say, God's justice is seen when we deal fairly with each other and strive to change customs and practices that oppress and enslave others. Justice involves protecting the rights of others. It protests against everything that destroys human dignity. So here, encapsulated in one of our subordinate standards, our confessions, which we have a very strong statement on the importance of justice. It doesn't only show up here in Living Faith, but this is the section that particularly focuses on this idea of justice.